This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us tonight Judge Tom Engel, one of the legal eagles from New York City, a man of great repute. And we're welcome to Macon, Georgia, Tom.
Well, Sam, it's very nice to be back, and nice to have an opportunity to talk with you over this televised broadcast.
Good, Tom. Well, I hope the weather suits your druthers here, having come from snowbound New York City. I hope
it's not so much snowbound in the city, but where we are in the country north of New York, we had three feet of snow yesterday, so quite a bit.
Wow. Well, yeah. so much for climate change, but it can be pretty nippy sometimes. Well, Tom, it's our custom to talk about a lot of things, and tonight we're going to be extremely brave. Only a very brave person, and I know I put you in that number, would undertake a conversation about gender issues in this time in the world. But shall we go that way? Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, we used to talk about sex. Now it's called gender, and now there's something called transgender, which isn't the same thing as transsexual, I don't think, but then I have trouble sometimes keeping up with the language and the neologisms that infect it.
Yes. Well, Tom, let's start out. I'm going to go in just a little biology story about the way reproduction occurs. You may know a lot about it yourself.
Well,
you might.
I do have children.
If I can make a little joke, yes.
I do have children.
Well, basically, that's rather funny. A long time ago, maybe 500 million years ago, there was asexual reproduction, and when sexuality appeared, there's an enormous biological advantage to that, because you can toss the dice with genetic structure, so you can have Darwinian dynamics that takes place, and so after every reproductive experience, new creatures that have different DNA are produced, and the ones that are most fitted to exist or go forward, they have that privilege. So in general, sexual reproduction is the story that's worked out over the past 500 million years. And as our species has started to walk the planet, depending on when you think we arose, under what circumstances, but we can go with the sort of the standard model that maybe 200,000 years ago, Homo sapiens are hatched out in Africa. And their genetic structure has been pretty much the same since then. There have been some changes, but there's been this extraordinary story with our species, starting out as small hominids in the Great Rift Valley. They gradually acquired dominion over the planet. And as that's happened, they've sort of traditional gender arrangements have occurred. And just to say this, when gender identity is hatched out, there are chromosomes that are there, and the ladies have double X chromosomes. So, and the males have a Y chromosome that's tossed in there, and so they have those differences. And it is impossible to erase those differences. So any creature, any human that's born, is imprinted with that genetic structure from the time of conception. So we have those issues. And the genders each possess different biological makeup. So there are substantial differences, and the ladies are tilted toward their reproductive responsibilities. So they have a lot of extra, I guess you could say, reproductive responsibilities, and they're wired up to be able to deal with that. And so just continuing my little biology discussion, in a state of nature, what's occurred is is the human brain has expanded so much, and the female pelvis not kept up with it, that about, in the state of nature, about 5% of the time, childbirth is a deadly experience. It's the child can't exit the birth canal, terrible events occur, the child dies, often the mother. Additionally, after childbirth, the ladies have these terrible problems that often can occur after that. And in a state of nature, the lady's life expectancy is about 2/3 that of a male. Well, that's our state of nature kind of story. And then what's happened is that there's been an enormous liberation that has occurred since reproductive sterility and childbirth, preventing infections has happened. The Hungarians started in 1846. Samuel Weiss did that. And there have been all these enormous improvements that have occurred with medicine. So childbirth has become less of a problem. And the abilities additionally to have birth control appropriately rendered. That means that a whole different set of circumstances have occurred in the past just several decades. And just to continue along our little discussion, I'm going to throw you the pitch after this. The new circumstances are that many of the female life expectancy is longer than the males, and additionally, many of the advantages that they possess have come forward. One of them is oxytocin, which is a hormone that is created. Ladies have this, and it encourages collaboration, kindness, generosity. And the males still have their testosterone, their aggressive tendencies. So we have this change that's happened. Additionally, one can say there could be some differences in intelligence, and lots of differences that might be there that may give the ladies a certain advantage in our contemporary world. So we're in this sudden circumstance where all these traditional biological parameters have been changed by medicine. And our world is a very different world than it was just a few generations ago. And I think each of the genders is trying to sort of come to some kind of understanding about what these new conditions mean. So I'll just take it along those lines. Now, right now, there seems to be a lot of disputes that happen, or legal issues, just about equality for pay, different ideas about behavior in the workplace. So the law is moving into trying to reestablish some kind of appropriate peace treaty between the two important genders. I would say they're important. Well, what do you think, Tom? So what's law?
Well, I mean, obviously the law has changed enormously in the last few decades as well, and from a point of view of the women. The law had been designed, say 50, 60 years ago, to protect women and to make sure that they were treated specially because of their delicate conditions, or their supposedly delicate conditions. Obviously, they don't have the same strength as men and physical strength in any case. And so women were protected by various laws that also derived from religious belief through the Christian religion particularly. And so there were, and that in turn was reflected in manners, so that if you you and your wife, or you and some other lady were entering a building, you would always stop and then open the door for the lady, and the lady would go through first. It was deemed to be something there. The man was stronger and could more easily handle the door, presumably. Likewise, if you were going to sit down at table, the lady would always be sat first, and the man would help her with her chair. And these sorts of protections and customs were rampant when you and I were mere lads.
Yes.
Of course, the primacy of the Southern Belle was
Yes.
was above all things revered, and these things have now given way to the idea that the sexes are equal, and they should be therefore treated equally, and there are still, in most cases, they are certainly by federal statute and by state statutes almost universally. Sex is a suspect classification, like race, for example.
Yes.
And so, if a black person or a Hispanic person is treated unfairly by, say, an employer, for example, then that person can present his case to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC, and they will investigate it, and then they will issue a letter permitting suit to be brought. Well, that's now true, of course, of women as well, and they can complain that they have been thwarted in their upwardly mobile search for compensation or for equal treatment and promotion, for example, and so there is, in theory at least, protection. We have seen, however, only recently in the Me Too movement, and
Well, what exactly is that, Tom?
well, this arose, if just months ago, from the unfortunate Harvey Weinstein detritus that came when it turned out that he was using the famous studio couch for all kinds of perverted
Yes.
uses, and then that spread to any number of other areas, but particularly it seems in the performing arts, in television, television news, politicians, and people who frequent the headlines.
Yes.
And it turns out that there was, notwithstanding all these equal rights that I've
Yes.
been talking about in the last few minutes, a culture where a dominant male in a particular industry or in a particular production or some other thing would take advantage of younger women.
Yes.
In a sexual way, frequently, it seems to me anyway, from reading the newspapers, in a perverted sort
Yes,
of
yes,
sexual
yes,
way.
yes.
It wasn't that they wanted to reproduce, it was
right.
that they wanted to have some sort of performance,
Right. Yes.
if you will.
Yes.
And that seems to me to be sort of a reassertion in a very unfortunate way of the primacy of testosterone and of male power. On the other hand, there are aspects now of the press for women's rights and privileges that I find very troubling as well, but we can get to that.
Well, let's just sort of go through. I mean, to me, the law is reflecting the changing, I guess, reproductive responsibilities. The whole relationship between the genders has just been extraordinarily changed by a lot of factors. I mentioned medicine. Another one is what is needed in the world these days. And I would say in the past, if you were a male, the fact you could kill saber-tooth tigers or you were physically stronger, your muscle had a greater muscle mass. That was a huge thing, and just the reproductive burdens for the females made them weaker. So the males had to have this protective function, and now I guess physical strength counts for very little in the way the world goes, and access to power. Additionally, I think a lot of the male instinctive sort of aggressive behavior, one could say, would be counterproductive many times, and just success in the world if you're too assertive, or it makes it difficult. And as I was sort of making the case earlier, the ladies have substantial advantages in some ways. their sense of kindness and collaboration and cooperation. Not always the case, but that's there, and so we have.
I think you may be overstating that a little bit.
Oh, mightn't I? Well, Tom, all right, you're going to hit the ball back now. Right?
I think women are I think have been shown in studies to be more collaborative. The kindness part, I'm not sure that would wash. But the collaborative part.
Oh, you don't think the kindness is out there? We'll get some call-ins. We're going to take calls now. On this. So I told you have to be rather brave to have this. We're quite brave. We're displaying our innate courage to even approach the conflict.
we raise an important point. I think that there's now a very clear preference that has been reflected about females. I would say since the 1960s. And colleges and preparatory schools and so forth were all integrated sexually,
yes.
So that you had boys and girls applying to the same school, so that you have, where we went
right.
to college, you had Harvard on the one hand, which was boys, and you had Radcliffe on the other, and then the deck was shuffled, and,
yes.
and you had both applying to the same
yes,
pool.
Right.
And there were advantages of that, of course, because IQ is handed out in sort of random fashion. So your pool, if you're Harvard, is improved by
yes.
having that many more applicants. That is to say, women and men.
Right.
Instead of just relying on a pool of men.
Right.
So that's an advantage. But that advantage has been replayed and multiplied
yes.
in many ways, so that now you have really all through the schooling experiences, girls excelling men in virtually every
yes.
possible area,
yes.
with the one major exception of so-called STEM studies, science, technology,
right.
and so forth. But even culturally,
mm-hmm.
I read an article the other day by a lady named Heather Wilhelm
yes.
Who wrote that because she has only boys, she has 3 boys, that people will come up to her and say how sorry they are
yes.
that she has only boys.
Right.
And and Christina Hoff Summers has done some major work in demonstrating the real prejudice against boys, particularly young boys, and you can see that. And I'll just say this 2 more things. Boys were disfavored when things like gym and recess
right.
were eliminated because those catered to the rambunctiousness and energy
right. levels
of boys, and boys were sometimes, because of their energy and rambunctiousness and sometimes misbehavior perhaps, also given drugs. And here we return back to the medicine.
Yes, right.
And these boys were given very serious drugs,
right.
the real consequences of which I don't know whether anybody even knows.
Yes.
But I would like to hear what you have to say about the Ritalin and so forth.
Right. Yes.
Because I've just heard a lot about it. I'm very concerned about it.
Right. Well, I mean, we're sailing our ship into troubled seas about how the world adjusts to these hardwired biological realities. So I would say there are substantial neuronal differences between male and female brains for lots of reasons. So there are differences. And the fact is, the law is sort of imagining there no differences exist, and there are advantages and disadvantages. And in general,
they're not only imagining it; they're postulating.
Right, that's right. And so that is what is occurring. And in many ways, an aggressive, let's say, 10-year-old that likes to, run amok, is being placed on medicines like Ritalin because of ADH syndromes, and lots of things like that are happening. And in fact, I can remember, Tom, if I may have been a victim of that earlier. I can well remember holding my hand out, seeing me be good in the 2nd grade, and have my hand hit, sit down with a ruler. I'd probably, who knows. I didn't get any Ritalin, but the idea is, it was a little too rambunctious as a 2nd grader. And so the system, in many ways, de-emphasizes that kind of aggressive maleness right down the line, and it's in some ways not understanding these biological differences, the law not understanding them. There's some problems. Additionally, I think one thing that could be said is that I think it's a hardwired desire for the ladies to have children. I think you could say that's a hardwired desire.
Question.
You could say, no, it doesn't exist.
No question.
And responding to the way the world is and to have children in these environments is very difficult, particularly if you're a person that's been blessed with a high IQ. All kinds of doors are opening to you at the same time. You want to have a family, you'd like to have the blessings of motherhood. So it causes lots of distress.
I'll raise another point just on that point. Many young ladies, because they want to be successful and want to have engaging and important professional responsibilities, go through high school and through college and then through professional school. And then they start their profession, and usually the start of profession, certainly in medicine and in law, are very rigorous periods.
Right.
So you want to get your feet on the ground and have a good start.
Yes.
But in order to do that, or to have done that, that takes a period of time that takes them sometimes into their 30s.
Sure.
And when they do that, and given the availability and ease with which the ladies can take the pill to prohibit any kind of pregnancy that would throw them off the track that they're on of success and accomplishment. They sometimes find themselves, saying, "Wait a minute, I'm 30 plus years old, and I'm in love, and I love this man I'm going to marry." And then I'll have my baby.
Right.
But then they've taken the pill for 15, 20 years, and they have all kinds of trouble reproducing.
There's reproductive difficulties.
So so that the genie was out of the bottle, but it has created problems as well as benefits.
Right. So there's a lot of in these difficult times. I mean, well-wishers should be thinking about these problems in my opinion, in a neutral fashion. So one of the things out there is, in a state of nature, fertility is at its maximum, I'll say, in the late teens. So that's the time that you have no trouble getting pregnant when you're 18, and there's difficulty at 38. And that's the system that's been employed. Additionally, one of the things going on is because many intelligent ladies are think, well, I can have one child, or I'm not going to be able to do much past that because of my situation. A lot of DNA is being removed from let's say DNA that might have potentials to produce some extraordinary humans. It's coming out of the gene pool because of this delayed reproduction arrangements. Now, but
there's also a sociological aspect of this that I worry about a lot. I mean, the United States is basically at a 2.1 fertility rate, which represents represents replacement.
Right.
And then, of course, we have immigration, which is another topic we can tackle another time.
Yes.
But in places like Europe, the fertility rates among native Germans, French, English is maybe 1.6.
Right.
And that's not replacement.
Right.
They have, however, many Muslim immigrants who have descended on the place that everybody thought were going to be temporary.
Right.
And these people have fertility rates far in excess of replacement in some areas, and but definitely higher than the native population.
Yes.
As a result, you're going to have a population exchange.
Yes.
And we will see what the future of Western Europe is. Certainly, the churches are emptying and the mosques are being built. We'll say that.
Yes, and well, I mean, we have this enormous cultural change. So just looking at the way the world is, you know, I sort of tried to say what a state of nature is, and then what arrangements are in some circles. But these are this sort of situation we talked about in the U.S. in regards to the whole world is a real minority arrangement. So there are, I've tossed Japan in as another place that's having issues, demographic issues.
Absolutely.
And many places have demographic issues. On the other hand, there's the world's population is racing forward as the benefits of, I guess, improved sanitation, the diminishing infant mortality rates in what you would traditionally call the third world, there are millions and millions of people being born. We have this great world stress issues that's out there. Now, just how you solve all these demographic issues is an issue, is something of consequence. Another thing that's going on, just secondary arrangements, are these tension tiders. How well-wishers can make the country good and work with trying to get some sense of fairness between the genders. So you could go back and you mentioned protection to start with. Well, protection can sometimes be, I guess, imprisonment. So the idea was that we could go through property rights, and it's a good legal conversation. But in earlier century, the idea that the female could not independently own property. She was in some ways the chattel, to use a bad word, of her father and then her husband, using once again bad words, and could not vote, own property, had enormous restrictions, and also cultural restrictions. Being able to, say, walk around in an independent fashion, just go out at night and walk around, or go anywhere alone, or there was a suspect maneuver. The whole culture was one, you could say, of protection, which really, from the other side of it, would be a sort of subtle imprisonment. And things have just just subtly, tremendously changed. And I'll ask this question. I can well remember as these changes were happening, the idea of putting an equal rights amendment through the Constitution and to put something in the Constitution, and that did not work. But what has happened, have the courts just really put in that constitutional amendment just with their decisions?
Well, the constitutional amendment largely failed because of the ingenuity and persistence of Phyllis Schlafly. And she organized, because the way the Constitution process works, it not only has to be passed by the Congress, but it has to be passed by state legislatures following.
Right.
And I think it's 3/4, isn't it?
It's a tough vote.
So they couldn't get to that level, and then after a certain point, it just lapsed. But the Congress and the state legislatures have more than made up for that by passing their own statutes, and heaven knows in terms of the bureaucracy, the regulations that follow that ensure those protections every bit as thoroughly as, or perhaps more thoroughly than a vaguely worded constitutional right.
Well, Tom, on that point, I think our time has expired now. I want to congratulate you and also praise myself for not blundering too much on this controversial subject. We'll talk some more about it.
Well, I look forward to it, and I just want to make sure my wife sees this and thinks the same way.
Right, I'm sure she does. Well, thank you so much,
nice
Tom.
to see you.
Yes, sir.
All
Thank
right,
you.
bye now.
Thanks for being here.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.